Yeah, thank you, John. We're going to keep on for the second part of the symposium. So my name is Hassan Zarour. I co-lead the program with John Kirkwood, more involved in the translational study in the lab side to try to understand why people respond or do not respond to treatment. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the patients who very kindly accept to be consented to banking protocol, to provide blood, serum, or even stool. Now, I think these are very important for us on the other side in the laboratory to better understand and find potential new therapy for the patients. So without any further delay, we're going to keep on this exciting symposium. And Amy Rose, who is a program manager of the melanoma program, is going to talk about the protocol office and clinical research coordination. Amy, it's up to you.
Hi, Dr. Zarour. Thank you. Yes, my name is Amy Rose. I am the clinical research manager of the Melanoma Center. I've been working with Dr. Zarour, Dr. Kirkwood since 2008. So like Melissa, I'm one of the old people here as well. I just want to talk a little bit today about clinical research. Share my screen here. So what is clinical research? Clinical research, they're clinical trials that are research studies for humans just to evaluate for new medical techniques. Typically, we look to find the safety, tolerability, and optimal dose of new drugs. And we also look to see what drugs we can use in combination. Usually these are combining a new drug with a drug that's already been approved, typically by the FDA. So every drug that is used in cancer care, whether it's one of the PD-1s or the CTLA-4s, they were all used in clinical trials prior to becoming FDA approved and open to outside of clinical trials. The goals of clinical research is to develop more effective treatments than what we have as a standard of care. We have a lot of drugs that are now FDA approved, but we continue to search for drugs that will work in either different types of melanoma, different stages of the disease as well. We're also looking to improve side effects for safer, more tolerable treatments. A lot of times that the drugs, when we start with the drugs in the clinical trials, we have to kind of work to find the best way to manage all the side effects that do come along with it. It is a learning process that happens with it. And then the ultimate goal is for regulatory approval through the FDA, where then the drugs are now available outside of a clinical trial, maybe at some local community sites as well. That way, a lot more patients will have those treatment options. But all of the medications that are FDA approved did start in clinical trials and were available to patients through the trials prior to FDA approval. So why participate in a clinical trial? Some very important reasons. Number one, to contribute towards the advancement of science, to help find a cure. If not a cure, help at least find something that might prolong survival or cut down on the rate that the disease is progressing. Being in a clinical trial also has you take on an active role in your own healthcare. You will learn a lot more about melanoma or the treatments that are available by participating in a clinical trial. The participation is always at will. It's completely voluntary. At any time, you're able to withdraw consent, whether it's if you're having trouble with the side effects or maybe even with trying to get to the Hillman Cancer Center to participate in the trial. At any time, it is completely voluntary for you to withdraw consent. We do ask that you speak with the physicians prior to doing that, though. It does have access to new medications. A lot of the medications are not available outside of a clinical trial and would only be available after signing consent through the Hillman. And there's also additional care that's involved, meaning our clinical research staff are available to answer any of your questions, even if it's a day that you're not in clinic, you're able to call the clinical research team and get your questions answered, or if you're having any side effects or problems, by all means, you'll be able to reach out to them at any time. So a lot of people ask about the safety of a clinical trial. So clinical research is designed to give the safest, most effective clinical treatment options. All medications are reviewed in laboratories and are studied in animals prior to being used in humans as well. And again, patients are monitored very closely by the clinical research team. You will see your clinical research coordinator at every visit that you're in. You'll see the physicians, the PAs, the collaborative practice nurses as well. They all work together to make sure that you are able to manage the side effects and continue with your quality of life as well. We do review patients every week. We have a meeting, review all patients that are in screening or on clinical trials or even in follow-up to make sure that there's no issues that we're missing at all. And then also just to know that clinical trials are reviewed prior to being open and recruiting for patients. We have a medical and scientific review of all clinical trials that come through. We also have the institutional review board that has to approve any clinical trial prior to patients going on. The institutional review board, or the IRB, is made up of physicians, scientists, lawyers, and other people that review to make sure that the trial is something that would be safe for participants and is something that would be manageable for the participants as well. And a lot of the trials also have to go through FDA review prior to being open for patients to be treated on. The FDA reviews, again, make sure that everything is safe prior to proceeding. So I just wanted to quickly review some of the phases of clinical trials. We do have a lot of phase 1 clinical trials. These trials are very new drugs. They test the safety, side effects, and doses of new medications. A lot of times it's looking at dose escalation, where you'll have a few patients that will start at a very low dose. And as long as that's tolerated well, we'll move on to a little bit of a higher dose. And we do that until we find what's called the maximum tolerated dose. It's the highest amount of drug that we can give with the least amount of side effects as well. These phase 1 trials are typically treated in multiple types of cancer. So it would not just be, for instance, a melanoma patient. You might have a patient with lung cancer or colorectal cancer on here as well. And it's usually a very small number of patients, sometimes as little as less than 60 patients on a phase 1 clinical trial. The phase 1 trials do have a lot of what we call PKs, pharmacokinetics, where we are testing the blood to see how much of the drug is found in the blood at certain hours after the medication is infused or given. So there is usually a lot of times where you'll be on a phase 1 clinical trial and you will be at the Hillman for sometimes longer days. Sometimes we can go up to as much as 6-8 hours after the drug is infused to test to see how much is in the bloodstream. Phase 2 trials are typically tested in a certain type of cancer. So after it goes through the phase 1 trial, they usually see which disease it works best in. The dose is found from the phase 1 trial, so it's the maximum tolerated dose. And it's looking at, does the new medication work? Does it have, is the disease responding to it? And this is typically a moderate group of patients, usually around 50 to 100. And then after the phase 2 trials are completed, we do move on to phase 3 trials. The phase 3 trials are typically randomized trials, meaning you'll either receive the standard of care treatment, which is already FDA approved, versus the study medication. Other types, we do have a lot of combination trials where, again, you might receive, for instance, a FDA PD-1 inhibitor in combination with the study drug as well. The phase 3 trials usually have a very large group of patients, anywhere to the hundreds to thousands of patients that are involved. And then lastly, we do have phase 4 trials. These are already FDA approved drugs, but the FDA would like to continue to do research on it. A lot of times they're looking at other factors, not so much how the disease responds or the side effects of it, but more like the quality of life of the trial, or what's the cost effectiveness of the trials as well. Phase 4 trials typically have thousands of patients that are involved in the phase 4 setting of the trial. So there are different parts of a clinical trial. It always starts with informed consent. So the physician, the PA, and the clinical research coordinator will be able to consent the patient. The purpose of the consent is so that the participant is completely aware of everything that's involved in the clinical trial, all of the possible side effects of it, how many times, how many days a week or how many days a month that you'll need to be at the Hillman to receive your treatment or have other testing done. It reviews the risks and benefits and also compares to what your other options of treatment would be, whether it's a standard of care or another clinical trial, or even observation in some cases. After the patient and the physician sign consent, they then move on to what's called the screening or evaluation or eligibility review. So every clinical trial has an inclusion or exclusion criteria laid out that all patients have to meet in order to participate in the study. This is just a safety to make sure that the patients are safe to proceed with the medication. A lot of times the screening evaluation will include CT scans, MRIs, lab work. Sometimes there'll be EKGs or echoes. There's always a physical exam by the physician and PA as well. And all of that information is then reviewed by both the clinical research coordinator, and we also do a second check, and then the physician or PA ultimately signs off to make sure that the patient is eligible for the trial. So once the screening evaluation is complete, the patients will then move on to what's called on-study or active treatment. That's when the actual clinical trial process starts. The treatment itself will begin, and typically that's what we call day 1. And from there, the protocol lines out what days you would need to be in for treatments. If there's any windows where we can move, whether you have a vacation planned or something, we can always try and work with that to make sure that you're still getting your treatment, but still being able to live your life as well. And then the last phase is the follow-up phase. A lot of times when patients come off treatment, whether it's if the treatment is completed, or a lot of treatments are set for maybe 1 year or 2 years, we do go into what's called survival or long-term follow-up. But before we do that, we also have safety follow-ups where we just review to make sure at the end of the trial, any adverse events that happened, any side effects from the treatment are taken care of or have resolved back to baseline prior to you coming off of the treatment. So my clinical research team is, we have a very large team. The clinical team is involved. This includes the physicians, the physician assistants that you'll see on a regular basis during the treatments, as well as collaborative practice nurses. They work very closely with the physicians and just take any phone calls and stuff the patients may have, or if you need standard of care treatments while you're on a clinical trial, the collaborative practice nurse will help with that. Such as if you're having, a side effect, you might need, for instance, a medication for nausea. The collaborative practice nurse will help be able to get that medication to you. We have a clinical research manager, which in my position, we work to lead the team to make sure that you're getting the best care from the research team. We also make sure that we have clinical trials available that are open and available for every stage of melanoma. Whether it's in the adjuvant setting, after you've had surgery, whether it's a neoadjuvant setting, so you have treatment prior to surgery, and then treatment again after your surgery is completed, or if it's in the metastatic setting, whether it's a front line where you've never had treatment before, or even a second line or third line treatment. We want to make sure that all of those options are available for patients at any time that they might need them. We also have the clinical research coordinators. They are essentially the face of research. They are all registered nurses, and they see all of the patients on the clinical trials every time that they come in for their treatments, or if they're just coming in for a follow-up visit. You will see the clinical research coordinators. You will also have a direct line, their phone number. If there's any problems or issues, you can call them, and they'll get back to you that same day as well. Working with the clinical research coordinators are the research associates. They are in charge of a lot of the data entry. So when any of the side effects that you report, any changes in medications, all of that information is gathered and entered into databases by the research associates. They are also in charge of preparing your lab kits with the PKs that I was talking about previously. They make sure that all of the research labs that are outlined in the protocol are available and able to be drawn at the time points that are needed. And then we also have the regulatory specialist. Their job is very much behind the scenes. In fact, most of them work from home completely. And they work with the internal review boards and the study sponsors to ensure that the most recent versions of the protocol are up to date and available for the clinical research team. They make sure that the IRB and the FDA has reviewed and approved these protocols prior to it being active and available for the patients as well. So we have, like I said, a very large group of individuals that work very closely to ensure that these clinical trials are available and they're the safest possible for all of our patients. And finally, I just wanted to end with a thank you. A huge thank you to all the patients that have participated in clinical trials. Without your participation, none of the drugs would be approved through the FDA and would not be available for all of the patients with melanoma at this time. So I do want to just say thank you so much. And I'll take any questions if you have any.